All right, we are in study number 7 in the Imagine All the People series. And this is going to be in 2 sections in the Bible, both in Matthew chapter 6, but it's Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And then skip a little bit, and then verses 16 to 18. So again, Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, and then 16 to 18. So, go ahead, again, read this passage on your own, digest it, meditate on it, churn it a little bit, ask questions, that kind of thing. You can pause the video, pause right now, and then come back. Okay? So this passage is basically has an interesting structure, and it's a few different sections that basically kind of say the same thing. The first one is saying, when you give to the needy, don't do as the hypocrites do. They receive their reward. When you give to the needy, do it in secret, that kind of thing. And then the second one is when you pray, do the same thing. Be private about it. Don't pray in front of everyone and that kind of thing. And then the last one is when you fast. So you have giving to the needy, praying, and fasting. And so these 3 things are very religious type of things. So if you pray a lot, if you fast, if you give to the poor, then you're being spiritual, And even today, I think we have some of that. You have some of that same stuff. So Jesus is kind of addressing some of those things. I think today it's a little bit slightly different, but it carries some of the same things. It's these people are spiritual because they do these things, right? Well, first of all, let's kind of take a look at the passage a little bit and look at the structure. So these 3 things all have the same structure inside them, right? First is don't do as the hypocrites do. That's the first thing he says. Either when you give to the needy, don't do as the hypocrites do. When you pray, don't do as the hypocrites do. Or when you fast, don't do as the hypocrites do. So that's the first thing. Don't do as the hypocrites do. The second thing that they do, the second structure, part of the structure, the formula, I guess, is Jesus keeps saying they've received their reward. They've already gotten their reward. When the hypocrites have already gotten the reward for praying, for fasting, for giving to the needy, right? The third thing he says, instead, do it in secret. Pray in secret. Give to the needy in secret. Giving to the needy, don't let your right hand even know what your left hand's doing or whatever. And when you fast. And then the last section is your Father who sees in secret will reward you in secret. Okay? So that's kind of the structure of all 3 of these little sections. And Jesus calls out these people, the hypocrites, because the hypocrites claim, what is a hypocrite? A hypocrite is someone who acts a certain way, but inwardly they're not really, it's not true, right? So with the spiritual stuff, when you pray a lot, when you're fasting, when you're giving to the needy, it's supposed to, what Jesus is saying is these things are supposed to do something inside you, supposed to change your insides. But on the outside, but these people are actually doing something for the outside reasons, right? They're giving to the needy because they want to get recognition. So their actual motivation is not from a pure place. It's not from they actually care about the needy. That's not why they're giving to the needy. The reason why they're giving to the needy is so that they can get praised by others, right? But it's interesting, though, that Jesus says they've received their reward. What is their reward? Recognition and praise. If you want to receive the reward from God, you better do it in secret. What's the reward that you will get from God? You will get the recognition from God. God will see, he sees what you've done in secret, and he's going to reward you. It actually doesn't say explicitly what the reward that God's going to give you, but it could be implied that it could be recognition from God himself, or it could be other more intrinsic rewards, right? So that's why I'm arguing that the reward from God is actually the intrinsic reward sometimes. So what's interesting about this is that I think everything that we do and everything that Jesus teaches, Jesus does tell you to look specifically for the reward. There are specific, practical, actual rewards for spirituality. And we're going to talk about this next week, but with prayer, when you pray, it's not just, it just goes into nowhere. There's actual effects that affect your life. Your life will be better because of your prayer. I think the same is true of fasting. When you fast, there are actual rewards that you get from fasting, from just doing the fasting. And that's why you fast. And when you give to the needy, there are actual rewards that you get from giving. And I think, again, the rewards are not, because the needy need it. Because I'm just being loving. That's not it. There are some selfish benefits. And here Jesus is teaching us those things are appropriate. Looking for selfish rewards is appropriate. Because the actual act itself will help you internally, will help you spiritually. Okay? And Jesus doesn't get into the specific rewards, so I'm not going to get into either. I think there are specific rewards. I think in the prayer section next week, we can talk about one of the examples of the specific rewards, of the spiritual rewards of these acts. But the point here is that there are rewards. So there are actual practical things that help you with that these spiritual disciplines or spiritual acts do. Okay, but of course the main point of this passage is not to do it. The reward is not. What is the reward not? And I think that's kind of the main point of this passage. The reward is not recognition by others. The reward is not looking spiritual. The reward is not getting praise from others. And that's the main point, I think, of this passage. It doesn't talk about what the reward is as specifically. I think the reward comes from God. It's internal recognition from God and different things like that. But it doesn't get into that, okay? The reward is not recognition from others. Now, in certain circles, in certain churches, and our church, I don't know, I think it's not too much like this, but let me talk about it anyways. In certain churches, I would say that being spiritual is actually looked at as, wow, that person's spiritual. I don't know if you've ever been in a church like this or whatever, but it's like, whoa, that person, I'm really impressed by so-and-so. They actually pray 5 times a week. Or I really look up to so-and-so because they fasted and they just seem so in tune with the Lord. Jesus is talking against all of that. That stuff, Jesus is really against all of that. So I'm not saying that everyone who fasts and prays and all that is like that, but there is certain culture and certain churches that are like that, and we need to be careful of that. Don't be like holding up prayer, reading the Bible, fasting, these spiritual disciplines as the be-all, end-all. That's not how you're supposed to judge spirituality. You judge spirituality by the fruit of the Spirit. The Bible is very clear. Galatians chapter 5. You've judged by love, peace, patience, kindness, joy, gentleness, self-control. All of those things. That's the true fruit of the Spirit. These things, fasting, prayer, giving to the needy, actually help you get there. They bring you into contact with God, and as you're transformed by God, then the spiritual fruit come out. But you shouldn't be looking and judging spirituality, your own or other people's, based on these specific acts that you do. It's just like these prayer, fasting, giving to the needy, these types of spiritual disciplines are actually kind of like doing drills in sports or working out, right? If you work out, you're supposed to get stronger, not just, oh, check me out, I work out, I'm good, right? Like, working out it has a high correlation to making people stronger, but not always. If you're not doing it right, if you're not doing it deliberately, if you're not practicing in the right way, you may not actually get stronger, right? If you're practicing for a sport or practicing piano, if you're practicing piano or an instrument and you don't practice in a deliberate, focused way to actually get to your goal, and you're just like kind of playing, you're not actually getting better at piano. So you should be judged on how good you are at piano, not, oh, so-and-so practices X hours a day. Oh, I practiced 20 hours last week. Great, but how good was that practice, and did it actually get you better? That's what you should be asking. And it's the same thing with these spiritual disciplines. Spirituality is not judged on how much you fast, how much you pray, how much you read the Bible. Those things are supposed to help you come into contact with God. And as you come into contact with God, fruit come out. You're more patient. You're kinder. You're more loving. And those are the things that we're actually trying to get to. It's not just try to pray as much as you can. If you're praying the wrong way, you're praying too selfish focusedly, or you're just praying like zoning out praying, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get anywhere. And a lot of times we don't understand what the purpose of prayer is. And we're going to get into that again in the next lesson. But if we don't understand the purpose of prayer and we just kind of pray, we're not actually going to produce spiritual fruit from it. And if you're praying just because you're supposed to, you don't understand the purpose, don't pray. I'm telling you. Only pray when you understand the actual purpose of it and try to figure that out. Try to figure out the reward. Okay? So, okay. That's some churches are kind of like that. I'm not sure if our church actually has that problem. It probably might have that problem in certain circles. But specifically, I think one thing that we can, and I think that is actually kind of the main point of this passage, is looking at recognition. How often do we want recognition from people? How often do we need recognition from people? Living and doing things, and this is, how do we live out this passage? Living and doing things for the recognition of people is so dangerous and destructive. If you want to go back to the fruit of the Spirit, if you're doing things for the recognition from other people, or because you want other people to like you, or because you feel peer pressured, or because of whatever reasons, if you're doing anything, work, your kids, anything in your entire life, and I'm not even just talking about these spiritual things, I'm talking about anything, it's going to destroy your life. You're going to have the opposite of the spiritual fruit. You're going to get more angry, more impatient, more all this stuff. Less joy, more crazy, right? If you live for the recognition of other people. You need to live for God's recognition. And it's some questions that help us to determine where we are with that. It's like, if you think about your work, you think about what the chores you do at home, or taking care of your kids, or like hanging out with your spouse, or taking care of them, serving at church. Have you ever felt like, oh, I did this and it was a thankless job? Like, nobody recognized it. What do you think about doing thankless jobs? Maybe you did laundry for your spouse and they did never notice. Were you upset? Did it make you feel like you're angry? I mean, we all need feedback. We all need praise. We all need recognition. We all need rewards. And when you do something and nobody thanked you, nobody recognized it, that stinks. The point of this passage is God sees. God knows. God is the one who's thanking you. God is the one who's recognizing you. If your spouse doesn't thank you, that's better. Because if you did laundry for your spouse and your spouse thanked you, you already received your reward, right? You want to do things for God, for His recognition, for the internal and intrinsic rewards of doing that kind act. That's the rewards from God. And He's going to give you the type of recognition and life change and that's how you're going to get to the peace. You're going to get to the love. You're going to get to joy, right? And that's the focus of what we should be doing, our everything we do in life. It should be focused on that stuff. I know it might be hard. It might be difficult. It's just like, oh, does God like actually recognize me? Does God actually see what I'm doing? And it's kind of like intangible because God is invisible and all this stuff, right? Again, we're gonna get into more of it next week when we talk about prayer and specifically why you pray. But a lot of these things, and you can look up the research if there's scientific like research behind some of these things. It's that when you do things like fasting, when you do things like taking care of other people, there's intrinsic internal rewards that come. You get more peace. You become more. It's for the person who's doing it. It's the act of giving is for the giver. It's not for the person who receives it. There's a lot of research showing that there's a lot of internal peace from giving. Internal, you feel good. You feel your heart is changed through the act of giving. So it has nothing to do with the effect of your gift. It has nothing to do with like how much does that person thank you? How much does that person acknowledge you? It has nothing to do with those things. It has far more to do with what the act of release, the act of giving up, the act of service. Those acts actually turn you into that type of person. Loving, peaceful, patient, kind. By doing those things, you're disciplining yourself into becoming that type of person. And that's the reward. Instead of being this angry, impatient, anxious person, all of a sudden you're a person of peace and love and joy. And think about joy. Don't you want that? I think that, and those are the intrinsic rewards that God is feeding you. He's recognizing you. He's telling you, good job. You did awesome, right? And the more we're in touch with God in terms of that, the more we're going to know, like you're communing with God tightly. He's going to give you that feedback. He's going to tell you what you're doing good. And you're going to feel it. And it's going to be awesome. All right. That's it for this study. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever. Please subscribe and like.